Welcome to our second episode on critical thinking and logic. In today's session, it's very easy and simple. We are going to look at syllogism and how to construct syllogism moods and figures. I hope you have watched the first episode because some terms we mentioned in the first episode are the ones that we are going to refer in the second episode. Also to remind you that this is a continuation from the first episode to the second episode. So if you have not watched the first episode, it is good you first of all start with the first episode so that it can be easier when you are watching the second episode. In today's session, you are going to construct syllogism moods and figures. For example, you have found such questions asking you to construct syllogism moods or syllogism moods and figures, for example, for EIO, AAA, among others. And then you have found that you can get or easily get those 20 marks with these. So if you are here for quick revision, you are at the right place. Whereby we are going to construct them and make your work easier. So this session is free, and that's why we are reminding all our viewers, those who are watching, to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Maybe you have found such questions on constructing syllogism of figures, of moods and figures such as AEO, AAA. These are the ones that we are going to look at in this episode. So we are going to tackle various critical thinking and logic questions to make it easy for you as you do your revision and as you study. So in this episode, our main objectives are defining the term syllogism. We're going to look at the types of syllogism by focusing on categorical syllogism, the other types of syllogism, but we are mainly going to focus on the categorical syllogism. We are also going to look at the 6 rules that are followed so that you form a valid categorical syllogism. And also we are going to attempt to construct various syllogism moods and figures. If the session will take more time, we are just going to try to make various syllogism moods and figures so that we can look for another episode so that we can dwell much on how to construct them. Let us now look at the definition of syllogism. We are going to define syllogism in the simplest way possible and in an easy way to remember. Syllogism is a form of deductive reasoning in which a conclusion is drawn from premises. As a deductive reasoning, the syllogism must have two premises, that is major and minor premise, and one conclusion that is drawn from the premises. Now, the best way to remember syllogism is that it is a form of deductive reasoning, whereby we defined in our last episode 1 that a deductive argument or a deductive reasoning is a reasoning whereby conclusions are drawn from the premises with certainty. So, syllogism, we are going to use the deductive reasoning or deductive argument in which we are going to be drawing conclusions with certainty from the premises that we are going to have. Therefore, as a deductive reasoning, all deductive arguments must have two premises, that is a major premise and a minor premise, and we are going to discuss them and what they mean, and the one conclusion that is drawn from the premises. So, in case you asked a question on what is syllogism, it's just a form of deductive reasoning in which a conclusion is drawn from the premises. Let us now look at the different types of syllogism. Number 1, we have conditional syllogism or hypothetical syllogism. And this one takes a form of if A is true, then B is also true. What we mean by A and B is just a statement, whereby if statement A is true or if a certain statement is true, then its correspondent part B is also true. And they are noted as invalid arguments or invalid syllogism because they are only true if the other one is also true. For example, if a student reads the module, an example of this kind of an argument, If a student reads the module, then they will pass the test. The student did not read the module, so definitely therefore the student will not pass the test. Here the argument, the conclusion is done from the premises, but there is some invalidity because the student might pass that exam because of other factors. Right now the listening to lectures, discussions, or even prior knowledge that favor that student to pass. So the student, saying that student is, if the student reads the module then they pass the test, and then they do not read the module and then they pass the test, it's a kind of a conditional syllogism or hypothetical syllogism. They also occur in our day-to-day lives. Like now, if you say that if you take medicine, you are going to get well. So if you don't get medicine, you are going to maybe suffer more. And then that person fails to suffer. Such kind of argument now. Or even saying that if you wake up early, you are going to get rich, and then another person wakes up late, and then that person gets rich. Such kind are called conditional syllogism or hypothetical syllogism. But we are not going much to dwell on them because they are hypothetical in nature. The second type of syllogism is disjunctive syllogism, and this takes a form of either A or B is true. Therefore, if statement A is true, statement B is false and vice versa. For example, when we say students are either disciplined or obedient, students are either disciplined or obedient. Tom is not a disciplined student. Therefore, we can conclude that Tom is obedient. So in this case, Tom has been termed as obedient because he is not a disciplined student. Because it is either a student is disciplined or obedient. One thing you are going to notice that one statement is either true, and if A is true, B is false. And if B is false, A is true, and vice versa. That is another type of syllogism that is termed as disjunctive syllogism. The third category of syllogism that we are going to focus more is on the standard categorical syllogism. And this term categorical, we use this term when we are looking at the types of proposition in the first episode. So make sure if you have not watched the first episode, make sure you watch it because it is a continuation from where we left. Because we are going to answer those questions on syllogism based on the standard categorical syllogism. Let us now look what is a standard categorical syllogism. A standard categorical syllogism is an argument that comprises of three categorical propositions, and each having three terms, each of which appears twice and is used in the same sense in an argument, but only used once in each proposition. I know this definition might appear broad, but it is very easy as you are going to see it in the next slide. Before we define syllogism, let us first of all do a recap of the first episode, what we discussed about categorical propositions. We see that categorical proposition have got four parts. The first part is for a quantifier, subject, popular, and the predicate. I hope you remember that from the first episode. For example, when we say all teachers are investors, all is giving us the number. It is giving a quantification of that number. How much or how many. And then we will have the subject class and the predicate class. And thus, these categorical propositions are the ones that are used when we are defining what is a categorical syllogism. Let us now define categorical syllogism with ease now. we give a simple way to define categorical syllogism. A categorical syllogism is any argument that have got three categorical propositions. What we mean by three categorical propositions is that they have got a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. And then they have got three terms, each of which is appearing twice in propositions, but only once in each proposition. What we mean by the terms, like now here we have the word dog, and here you have the other dog, another dog in the second premise. You cannot repeat the word dog twice in one proposition, or you repeat black in one proposition. For example, here we have said all dogs are black. You cannot come and say all dogs are dogs. That is repetition. That is what we mean that that term is only repeated once in each proposition. And then we have got three terms. Like now in our argument, there are three terms that we are repeating. We have the word dog, black, and dog, and black here. So three terms are appearing. And then there is one that is appearing twice. For example, if you look at the word dog and dog here, they are appearing twice. And the word black is appearing here and also here in the conclusion. That is what we had defined about the categorical proposition. What is a categorical proposition? It's a form of deductive. I've got three categorical proposition, and the term is appearing twice, but only once in each proposition. Let us learn more from this example. When you say that all dogs are black, Tommy is a dog. Therefore, definitely Tommy is black. We have arrived at our conclusion from the premises. We cannot fail to give or to say that Tommy is black because if all dogs that we have are black and Tommy is one of the dogs, definitely Tommy is also black. Here we have derived our conclusion from the premises. Remember here in syllogism, we focus on the validity of the conclusion. The validity of an argument is the ones that conclusion follows from the premises necessarily. We have necessarily said Tommy is black because of the premises above. Don't confuse about the valid argument with the soundness of an argument. A sound argument, and this one we might tackle in another session. Sound argument is the one that conforms with the reality. This is not a sound argument because we cannot argue that in the reality that if we get outside and look at the number of dogs that are black, we are going to find other dogs are even white, others are brown. But that is being sound, the soundness of an argument. But here we are not looking at the soundness of an argument. In this syllogism, we'll be looking at the validity of the argument, whereby the conclusion that we are going to have is being derived from the premises necessarily. So don't argue outside that. In the reality that some dogs are black, so you cannot say that all dogs are black. No, we are just forming an argument here so that we get a valid argument, but not a sound argument. So arguing that all dogs are black and Tommy is a dog, definitely Tommy is black, is a valid but not a sound argument. But we do not mainly focus on the soundness of an argument or making the argument conform with the reality. We are just making the argument to be valid, that the conclusion has necessarily been derived from the premises. Let us now look at the different terms in that argument so that we can fully understand the categorical syllogism. We said all dogs are black. All dogs are black. Tommy is a dog, and therefore definitely Tommy is black. This is just an example of an argument. Remember, we can change these all dogs, this quantifier, and then we can say some dogs, among other, like now no dog, among other different forms. So like some dogs are not. But in this kind of argument, there are different terms that we have used. The first one is the dog, black, and Tommy. Dog is the subject class of the major premise. Whenever we look at the different part of a proposition, this is the major premise because you remember in the first episode, the first video that we talked about the critical thinking and logic, we said that the one that is having the predicate of the conclusion, the one that's having the predicate of the conclusion is the major premise. It becomes the major premise automatically. Like now the word black is the predicate of the conclusion. The one that is having it is the first premise. And then the first premise automatically becomes the major premise. And the second one automatically becomes the minor premise. And then the word black also has not been repeated in the second premise. So these are, you should now realize that in deductive argument you start from general, then it becomes specific, and then you form a conclusion. For example, we talked about all dogs. You are general, that's a general statement, and then you focus with one dog, Tommy, just one dog. Now it is from general to specific, and then you are doing conclusion from the premises. Tommy, Tommy here is the subject, the minor premise, and also repeated as the subject in the conclusion. Black is the predicate of the major premise, predicate of the conclusion. We have talked about that. We are going to realize the word dogs has been repeated twice, but not in the same proposition. You cannot say all dogs are dogs. No, that one will be an argument that is not logical in nature when it comes to categorical syllogism. But you have repeated the word dogs twice, but not in one proposition, and also not in the conclusion. For example, the word dog is not appearing in the conclusion. If you note, look in here. That is why it is called a standard categorical syllogism. Two terms are repeated twice, but not in the same proposition. And then the predicate of the conclusion is held by the predicate of the major premise. We're going to learn more about forming such argument with these as we continue this session. Our next objective was to identify the major premise and the middle term. Or how do you identify the major premise and the middle term? The major premise is the one that has the major term, and that is the predicate of the conclusion. So the major term is the predicate of the conclusion, which is also the predicate of the major premise. So whenever you want to know which is the major premise, it's the one that have got the predicate of the conclusion. The middle term, it is denoted with P, appears in two premises but does not appear in the conclusion. Since we'll be forming a categorical syllogism using examples like the one that we have given about all dogs are black, or investors, or farmers are investors, among others, it is important to identify the rules that are followed when you are forming a standard categorical syllogism. This will ensure the validity of our argument, so that we don't just give examples and then when we go to the conclusion, it's not valid. Remember, the validity of in the deductive argument is based on the reasoning that conclusion follows necessarily from the premises. So it is important to look at the 6 rules that are followed when you are forming a standard categorical syllogism. This will be very important because you might give examples that do not follow uh, the right validity of the conclusion. The 6 rules of a valid categorical syllogism includes: number 1, the argument must have 3 terms in the propositions. When talk about the 3 terms, they are the major term, minor term, and the middle term. For example, let us look at this example here. And we say no entrepreneur have saving. Joy is an entrepreneur. Therefore, certainly Joy does not have saving. What do we mean here? We have excluded all entrepreneurs from having saving. Then we have gone down to be specific. We are looking at Joy as an individual, as an entrepreneur. And if no any entrepreneur who have saving now, Joy is an entrepreneur, therefore certainly Joy does not have saving. In this argument, there are 3 terms that have appeared. Number 1 is the major term, which is the predicate term of the conclusion. If you look in the word saving here, in red is the predicate of the conclusion. It is also appearing as the predicate in the first premise. This first premise now automatically becomes the major premise because it is the one that is having the predicate of the conclusion. And then we have the minor term. This is the subject term of the conclusion. If you look at the subject term of the conclusion, it's the word joy. It's also appearing here in the second premise, and this now becomes the minor premise because it is the one that is having the subject of the conclusion. Then we have the middle term. This is the one that is appearing in the 2 premises but does not appear in the conclusion. If you look keenly, the word entrepreneur is appearing twice in the first premise and second premise, but there is no word entrepreneur in the conclusion. And this one now becomes the middle term. So that is the first rule, that we must have the 3 terms in the propositions. Okay, this is all what we have discussed, that no entrepreneur have saving. Joy is an entrepreneur and therefore Joy does not have saving. We've identified the major term is the word saving, the minor term is the word joy, and the entrepreneur is the middle term, as it appears in 2 premises but does not appear in the conclusion. This is very important, this kind of explanation, because when you will be explaining your syllogism or that argument, you'll be giving or you'll be using such terms such as minor term, major term, middle term, major premise, minor premise, among other terms that you'll be including. But the 3 major terms that are there to make it valid is the major, minor, and the middle term. The second rule is that the middle term must be distributed at least in one of the 2 premises to avoid committing a fallacy of undistributed middle term. As we have said, if there is no middle term, the argument will not be valid. So the middle term, you must have a word that is appearing in 2 premises but not in the conclusion. If you fail to do so, you're going to create an error in thinking of undistributed middle term or a fallacy of undistributed middle term. Number 3, or rule number 3, remember we are looking at the 6 rules. Number 3 is any term that is used in the conclusion must also be distributed in the premises in which they occurs, either as a subject or predicate of either major or minor premise. Avoid committing a fallacy of illicit process. Remember, in the conclusion, the predicate of the conclusion must be from one of the premises, which will become the major premise, while the subject must come from the premises, so that the terms are distributed, or they are coming from the premises, so that you are deriving conclusion from the premises necessarily. So either subject or predicate of either major or minor term must be in the conclusion to avoid committing a fallacy of illicit process. The fourth rule of categorical syllogism is that a standard categorical syllogism can only have one negative premise, but not two. You can only have one negative premise, but not two, to avoid committing a fallacy of exclusive premises. For example, if you say no entrepreneurs love saving, Joy is not an entrepreneur, therefore Joy does not love saving. This is wrong because just looking at this, there is no entrepreneur who loves saving, so this is a negative. We have excluded all entrepreneurs from the predicate of saving. And Joy, we have also excluded her from being an entrepreneur. Although the argument that you are going to make will not be valid because you have not derived from the premises. We have excluded all entrepreneurs. We have also excluded Joy. So we are having two negative statements here. And thus you are going to commit a fallacy of exclusive premises. So avoid or ensure that there is no two negative propositions when you are constructing your syllogism in a syllogism to ensure that they are all valid. The fifth feature of a standard categorical syllogism is that you cannot have a negative conclusion unless you have a negative premise. So one of the premise must be negative for the conclusion also to be negative. For example, let us look at these examples. We have two examples here of horses and reptiles. We start with the horses here. All horses are animals. All horses are animals. All animals are living beings. Therefore, no horses are living beings as the conclusion is negative. Yet these two premises are positive in nature. There is no word no. But this is invalid because you cannot deny that the horses are living beings, yet all animals are living beings and all horses are other animals. So this argument is invalid because you are having a negative conclusion, yet there is no single proposition or premise that is negative. But let us look at this second example here. There is no reptiles that are mammals. So there is not even a single reptile that is a mammal. And we have all crocodiles are reptiles. And therefore no crocodiles are mammals. This is valid. If you think critically here, we have excluded all reptiles from being mammals. And we have said all crocodiles are reptiles. So if there is no reptile that is a mammal and a crocodile is a reptile, there is no any single crocodile that is a mammal. This is valid because you are having a negative conclusion and there is one premise that is negative. And that is one of the rule of the fifth rule of a categorical syllogism. You cannot have a negative conclusion unless you have a negative premise. The sixth and the last rule of the categorical syllogism is that a valid categorical syllogism cannot have two universal syllogisms. The universal syllogisms are either S or SRP or no SRP, and then you have a true conclusion, as this will cause an existential fallacy. Remember in the first episode, and this is a reminder, if you have not watched the first episode, it is good you go back first before you watch the first episode, so that you familiarize yourself with what is universal syllogism. They are the ones that takes the form of or SRP or no SRP. That is, or subject are predicate or no subject are predicate. So this existential fallacy occurs when you use two universal premises and then the conclusion is true. For example, when you have a premise 1, all cows are animals. This is universal affirmative. And then you say all animals are mortal, meaning all animals are subject to death. It's also universal affirmative. And then you have a conclusion that says therefore some cows are mortal. Here you have excluded some cows, yet all cows are animals, and all animals are mortal. Why is this invalid? It is because you cannot move from universal statement or ARB or a SRP to a particular claim of some A exists without assuming existence of all of them. And that is why this argument have got a extension fallacy. Also here as a conclusion, you cannot have there are no cows that are mortal because you have included all of them in this argument. Also, you cannot exclude the cows from being mortal if the animals because of the first two premises. We are now through with the 6 rules. I know those rules will be very important in our episode of this session. Let us now go to the main part of constructing syllogism moods and figures. But before that, what is a mood when it comes to syllogism? A mood in categorical syllogism refers to the combination of the type of the categorical propositions A, E, I, and or O that are used in an argument as the premises and conclusion. And the moods are A, E, I, O. In the first episode, we talked about A. For example, we say these are the proposition that takes the form of or SRP, and that is a mood of A. E, we said no SRP, that is the mood of V. I, we talked of the mood of some SRP, and O is a mood of a proposition. Some S are not P. This occurs in day-to-day life when we are making a claim, even in a court of law, in our medical practice station, or even in our education, especially if you are a teacher, you are making decisions. The arguments that you make, sometimes they take a certain mood. For example, when you say all runners passed the exam, that's you have taken a mood of A. And when you say no runner failed in that test, you have taken the mood of E. You have been either included all of them or either excluded all of them. You are particular on some of them and you have excluded a particular number. So let us look at the moods and how they are used to form syllogism, categorical syllogism. So the mood is the combination of these ones. Like now you can take A, E, I, you form a mood of that. When you combine them, they make a certain mood in your argument. And note, if you take the first three, A, E, I, these three, the first one becomes a premise, and the last one becomes a conclusion. We combine three of them because we say in a deductive argument, we only take, it must have got two premises and one conclusion. And that is a must in a deductive argument because we get the conclusion directly from the premises.
Okay, let us now remind ourselves about the summary of the forms of standard categorical syllogism that we first of all discussed in the first episode. Remember we said whenever you see A is a mood letter name where proposition is having a universal affirmative or SRP. For example, when you say all cats are black, whenever you see letter E, it's requiring you to create a proposition or a premise where no SRP or universal negative, or rejecting or that no subject is in the predicate. I, whenever you see I, remember you are required to form a premise that have got some SRP. There's some subject are in predicate. That is a particular affirmative, just a small number. And whenever you see U, it requires you to form a proposition where some S are not P. That is a particular negative where there is some exclusion of a certain number of subject from the predicate. This table is very important. We also gave an example in the first episode. So you can first of all counter check with what we discussed about this table so that we can drive much into learning about syllogism and how to create syllogism mood and figures. We have been mentioning about figures in syllogism, Let us first of all now look at what is a figure in a categorical syllogism. The figure in the categorical syllogism refers to the specific positioning of the middle term, or where the middle term is within the premises. Remember, not in the conclusion, but within the premises, that is in the major premise and minor premise. There are only 4 possible figures or position of the middle term when it comes to the two premises, major and the minor, in a standard categorical syllogism. All you are supposed to remember is that the middle term is the term that appears in both premise but does not appear in the conclusion. So we cannot go to look for a middle term in the conclusion, but we look at the middle term where the middle term is, and then we can now know which figure it takes that argument. For example, there are only 4 figures, so you can just write first figure, second figure, third figure, or the fourth figure. This is one of the easiest questions on syllogism, because when the moment you identify where the middle term is, and then you write the mood, and then you write the figure, you get your 20 marks, and that will be done. So it's very simple, as we are going to see in the next example. The four possible figures we have mentioned are the first figure, and this occurs when the middle term is the subject of the major premise but the predicate of the minor premise. This is a case whereby you find the middle term is in the subject in the major premise, but in the predicate it is the predicate of the minor premise. We are going to look at example of that. Then you have second figure. This, whenever you see a middle term, is the predicate of both the premises. And remember, what is a middle term? The middle term is the term that appears in both proposition or both premises but does not appear in the conclusion. So whenever you see the middle term appearing in both premises, that automatically becomes second figure. And when you are giving reason why you say this is second figure, you just say this because the middle term is the predicate of both premises. Let us look at the third figure. The third figure is when the middle term appears as the subject of both premises. This is the opposite of the second figure. So whenever you see the middle term, or the term that is appearing in the both premises but not in the conclusion, is the subject, that is the middle term as the subject in both premises, we just write this is the second figure because the middle term appears as the subject of both premises. Lastly, we have the fourth figure. The fourth figure, the middle term is the predicate of the major term. The middle term is the predicate of the major term or the subject term of the minor premise. So the middle term appears as the predicate of the major term, but as a subject in the minor premise. And we have looked at the example of how you create now syllogism mood and figure, and directly how you are going to tackle it in an exam. Don't be worried about these figures and how they are a bit challenging. You should have a simple way or a diagram, a short diagram that you will be drawing in your exam, so that you can directly identify the figure in an easy way. So there is no need of cramming all this, because there is a short form of how you remember the first, second, and third figure. So this one should not worry you on how you are going to cram them, but by identifying the short method of how you position the middle term and the predicate and the subject in the premises will help you to identify them. Okay, let us now look at how you are going to do an example of the syllogism mood. If you are given in an exam, construct the syllogism mood of the following. For example, you might be given 4 of them, and each will give you 5 marks. So it is out of 20 when you are told to give the syllogism mood and figures. But maybe you can just be given to look for the syllogism mood, which might, if you are given 4 of them, around 10 marks. So when you are told to look for syllogism mood and figure, this is an example of how you do. Let's take this one, AII. You are going to write, it means it has an argument that has got what? A, an universal affirmative, or SRP. The second I is the minor premise now, or the second premise will have a particular affirmative I, some SRP, and then the last I symbolizes the conclusion. And the conclusion will have a particular affirmative of some SRP. And then you're going to give an example of this, because this is one that gives us the mood. So just going to write that A, or the first A, shows that it is a syllogism or a proposition that I've got, or universal affirmative. For example, you can write all brokers are professionals. And secondly, you write particular affirmative of some SRP. You say some teachers, now you are specific. Some teachers are brokers. And then you conclude by saying, if some teachers are brokers and brokers are professionals, therefore, some teachers are professionals. When you write this, and then you add that the middle term is the word brokers, because it is appearing twice in both premises, and the word professionals is the predicate of the conclusion, and therefore the first premise is the major premise and the second one is the minor premise. That is, you will have answered the question about the moods. But if you asked about the figure, you need to go further to write which figure is this, whereby we have the middle term. Middle term is brokers, right? Because it is appearing twice. So here we have a case of middle term predicate. Remember the predicate, what we talked about the predicate in the first episode. The second premise, we have a subject, and then we have the middle term. So we are having a middle term predicate. The word middle term is denoted with P. The word middle term is denoted with MT, and the word predicate is denoted with P. This is the first premise, MT, P. Second premise, we have subject and the middle term, SMT. If you remember keenly what we have talked in the last PowerPoint on position of the figures, this is the first figure because the middle term is the subject of the major premise and the predicate of the minor premise. Imagine by doing all this, only this thing, you are given 5 marks for AII. So if there are 4, you are easily going to acquire the 20 marks. However, this is just an example. We are going to look at how we are going to create all of them, or the other syllogism modes that we have and figures that we have left here in the next episode. So follow our YouTube channel and also subscribe for more on syllogism and other educational materials. We are grateful for watching. In the next episode, we are going to look at how easily you can construct the syllogism mode and figures, because it's just simple and these are easy marks to acquire. So send to other members so that they can get assisted. These are free material. Just need to subscribe and follow our YouTube channel. Thank you.